I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president hit me with a fine that could reach $1 million, all because of my wheelchair ramp. And her excuse? She said she was just following procedure. Funny thing is, the only thing official that day was the court order in my lap to dissolve her board. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Hank Mercer. My legs don't work, but my brain does. It's an engineer's brain. It likes problems. It likes finding simple, elegant solutions. For the past 5 years, the problem has been my body. The solution was this chair, this van, and this house my grandpa left me. A quiet life. I had my dog, Daisy. I had my projects in the garage. I had peace. Then a new problem moved in. Her name was Karen George, and she was the newly elected president of our homeowners association. She didn't like my solutions. She saw them as violations. And she was about to find out what an engineer does when his quiet, orderly world is threatened. He doesn't get mad. He gets methodical. It started with a piece of paper, a crisp white envelope tucked under the windshield wiper of my van. It was a Tuesday. The sun was out. Birds were singing. All the things that are supposed to make you feel good. Daisy, my golden retriever service dog, sat patiently on the grass beside my ramp, her tail giving a slow, steady thump, thump, thump against the ground. I had just finished my morning coffee on the porch. Everything was fine. Then I saw the envelope. I wheeled down the ramp, the one I designed myself. It was aircraft-grade aluminum, perfectly graded, with non-slip treads and motion-activated lights. It was stronger and safer than any code required. I knew this because I had spent a month running stress calculations on it before I even ordered the metal. To me, it was a bridge to the world. To Karen George, according to the letter inside the envelope, it was an unapproved architectural modification. Fine, $500. Karen called it a special assessment, stack her tickets, and the threat sheet said the number could hit $1 million. Mark would later tell me it wouldn't stand, but fear was the point. I read the letter again. The words were full of legal-sounding nonsense. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Aesthetic harmony. Governing documents. It was signed with a flourish. Karen George, President. I looked at my ramp. It was clean, silver, and functional. It was no more an architectural modification than the steps leading up to my neighbor's front door. It was access, a very basic, very necessary thing. State code and the ADA protect that access. Finding it is discrimination. Daisy nudged my hand with her wet nose, sensing my stillness. I gave her a scratch behind the ears. "It's okay, girl," I murmured. "Just a small bug in the system." I filed the letter in a new folder on my computer desktop. I labeled it HOA. Then I took detailed, high-resolution photographs of the ramp from every possible angle, with a tape measure in each shot for scale. Documentation is step 1. 2 days later, another envelope appeared. This one was taped to my front door. It was about my van. My van is a big, slightly clumsy-looking machine, but it's a masterpiece of engineering. It has a lowered floor, a power ramp, and a complex system of hand controls that let me drive with absolute precision. To park it correctly and deploy the side ramp, I need extra space. The spot in my own driveway was the only place it worked. The letter informed me that parking a commercial-style vehicle in a driveway was against the rules. State law protects accessible parking and equipment. Cutting out the plate in her photo didn't change that. The picture she had included, taken from across the street, conveniently cut off the government-issued disabled license plates. Fine. Another $500. The bug in the system was starting to look like a deliberate virus. I added the new letter and more photos to my folder. I took a video of the van's ramp deploying, showing exactly why I needed the specific parking spot. I even pulled up the county records from my property line, just to be sure. I was well within my own space. This wasn't about the rules. This was about me. I called my grandpa. He was the one who bought this house 50 years ago, long before any HOA existed. He just listened, his silence a comforting weight on the other end of the line. "Hank," he said finally, his voice raspy but clear. "Some people, when they get a little bit of power, it's like giving a toddler a hammer. They just want to smash things to see what happens. Don't let her smash you. Be smarter, wise words. Engineers don't smash. We analyze, we plan, and we build a better structure." The third fine came the following Monday. This was the one that really clarified things for me. A few months back, there had been a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I have a lot of specialized expensive tools in my garage for my engineering projects. So, I installed a security system. Part of it was a very discreet low-voltage alarm wire. It was thin, professionally installed, and completely hidden in the mulch around my flower beds. It was also fully permitted by the city. Low voltage, inspector signed, and legal. An audible alarm, not a shock line. The permit was on file down at the records office. The letter called it an unauthorized fence and a potential hazard. Another $500. $1,500 in less than a week. This wasn't a toddler with a hammer. This was a targeted attack. The virus had a purpose. It was trying to delete me from the neighborhood. I sat on my porch, the 3 letters spread out on the small table beside me. Daisy rested her head on my knee. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of my neighbors. This was my home. My grandpa had built that porch with his own 2 hands. I had designed the ramp that let me access it. I had earned the money for the van that gave me freedom. Every piece of my life here was a solution to a problem. And now, Karen George was creating a new problem, a big one. She thought she could just stack fines on me until I broke, or packed up, or gave in. She thought I was an easy target, a guy in a wheelchair. What could he do? She had no idea. She was looking at the chair, not the man in it. And the man in the chair was an engineer. He had just been presented with a fascinating new problem, a system that was broken. And I was about to do what I do best, analyze the system, find its weaknesses, and design a more elegant solution. The solution, I suspected, would be the complete and total disassembly of Karen George's little empire. My war had just begun, and I hadn't even fired a shot. All I had done so far was collect her ammunition. The question was, what was my first move? I needed more data. That's always the first step. You don't start building until you have the blueprints. My blueprints were the HOA's own rules, and my data was Karen's behavior. I needed to see her in her natural habitat. I needed to understand the machine before I could take it apart. That's where my neighbor, Tom, came in. Tom lived 2 houses down. He was a retired air traffic controller, and his hobby was anything that involved scanners, radios, or antennas. His house looked like a NASA tracking station. He knew everything that happened on our street. He was the neighborhood's nervous system. And he was my first ally, even if he didn't know it yet. I wheeled over to his place the next morning, Daisy trotting happily beside me. Tom was in his garage, surrounded by a mountain of electronic parts, a soldering iron in his hand. "Hank, good to see you," he said, peering over his glasses. "What's the frequency?" It was his standard greeting. "Tom, I need your expertise," I said, getting straight to the point. "I need to know about Karen George, patterns, habits, anything." Tom put down the soldering iron and leaned back, a grin spreading across his face. "Ah, Queen Karen, the scourge of Sycamore Lane. You've come to the right place." He told me that since she'd been elected president, her entire life revolved around patrolling the neighborhood in her golf cart, a clipboard in hand. She had a routine: morning patrol at 8, midday patrol at 1, evening patrol at 6. She documented everything. A garbage can left out an hour too long, a patch of lawn that was a quarter-inch too high, a kid's bicycle left on a driveway. She was meticulous. She was also predictable. An engineer loves predictable systems. They are the easiest to dismantle. My plan was simple. I needed to record her. I needed objective, undeniable proof of her harassment. I had a small camera, not much bigger than a sugar cube, that I sometimes used for my projects. I mounted it discreetly on the frame of my wheelchair, pointing forward. It gave a perfect wide-angle view of everything in front of me. The next day, at precisely 1 o'clock, I waited. I was sitting at the end of my driveway, pretending to adjust one of my chair's wheels. Right on schedule, her golf cart came humming around the corner. She spotted me, and her eyes narrowed. This was it. I activated the camera. She pulled up, blocking the sidewalk entrance from my driveway. Not just blocking it, but parking her cart diagonally, leaving absolutely no room for me to pass. A clear violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. "Mr. Mercer," she began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We need to talk about these fines." I kept my voice calm and level. "There's nothing to talk about, Karen. Your fines are baseless. My ramp is for access, my van is legally parked, and my security system is permitted. Her smile vanished. The rules are the rules. They apply to everyone. You are not special. This was the moment I was waiting for. The moment she would reveal her true motivation. It's not about being special, I said. It's about having the same access as everyone else. For example, right now, you are blocking my access to the public sidewalk. Could you please move your cart? I gestured with my head towards the path she was obstructing. Her face turned a blotchy red. She hated being challenged. Tom was right. She wasn't used to it. I am conducting official HOA business, she snapped. This sidewalk is part of our common area, and I will park here for as long as I need to. It was a lie, of course. The sidewalk was public property, maintained by the city. But she believed her own hype. She believed she was the law. So, you're refusing to move? I asked, making sure to get a clear, audible yes for my camera. I'm not moving until you agree to pay these fines and remove that hideous ramp, she said, crossing her arms. Her little power trip was in full swing. She thought she was cornering me. In reality, she was walking right into the elegant little trap I had set for her. I just nodded slowly. Okay, Karen. I understand. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just let her dig her own hole. I let the camera record her smug, triumphant face. I let it record the golf cart completely blocking the public right-of-way. After another minute of her glaring at me, she seemed to get bored. She huffed, started her cart, and drove off to find some other rule to enforce. The moment she was gone, I stopped the recording. I had it. Clear video and audio. A civil rights violation, clear as day. I went back inside and uploaded the file to my HOA folder. It sat there next to the photos of the fines. My collection of evidence was growing. I kept building the case. Karen thought she was the one in control. She thought her clipboard and her rulebook made her powerful. But I had something better. I had data. I had facts. And I had the patience to wait for the perfect moment to use them. The question now was, what would she do next? Because I knew this was far from over. I had challenged her directly. And a person like Karen George always escalates. I just needed to be ready for it. The escalation came sooner than I expected, and it came in the middle of the night. About a week after our sidewalk confrontation, I was woken up at 2 a.m, not by a sound, but by a sudden jarring blast of light and noise. Every floodlight on my property flashed on at once, and a siren, the kind that could wake the dead, started screaming into the night. Daisy pressed to my knee. The house pulsed, white light, then dark, like a heartbeat. I killed the bedroom lamp, rolled low, and watched the yard breathe in flashes. Mulch kicked up near the roses. A shadow moved, quick, crouched, careful. My thumb found the radio. Tom, eyes up. His drone rose, the whir like a wasp. I stayed low and watched. Adrenaline, focus, analysis. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a trigger, the perimeter wire. Someone had cut the wire. I wheeled over to my office window, which overlooked the front yard. The street was already lighting up with red and blue. A police cruiser was pulling up. Good. The system had a silent alarm that notified the police department directly. It also blasted an outdoor siren on purpose, to scare off whoever cut the line. As I watched, a young officer got out of his car. He looked cautious, his hand near his sidearm. Then something else caught my eye. A small, buzzing light hovering over the house across the street. It was Tom's drone. Of course, Tom's scanner would have picked up the police dispatch the second it went out. He was already recording the scene from above, capturing everything in high-definition, thermal image glory. My network of allies was growing. I met the officer at the front door. He was young. His name tag read RUIZ. He looked nervous but professional. "Sir, we got a perimeter alarm," he said. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine, officer," I said calmly. "But I believe my alarm wire was intentionally cut." I led him around the side of the house, my own flashlight beam cutting through the dark. We found the spot easily. The wire, which ran through a narrow conduit just beneath the mulch, had been pulled up and snipped. It wasn't a frayed break from an animal or decay. It was a clean, sharp cut, right through the copper, the kind of cut you make with a pair of wire cutters. Officer Ruiz knelt, shining his flashlight on the severed ends. He tagged it as vandalism in the report and marked the scene for follow-up. He started his official process, taking pictures, making notes in his little book, asking questions. He was thorough. I liked that. While he worked, I told him about the fines, the harassment from Karen, and our confrontation on the sidewalk. I didn't embellish. I just stated the facts. He listened patiently. "I can't prove who did this tonight, Mr. Mercer," he said when I was done. "But I'm putting all of this in my report. The prior harassment establishes a clear motive. This is more than just petty vandalism now. This is criminal." He handed me a card with a case number on it. "If you think of anything else, you call me directly." He was fair. He was by the book. He was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. After he left, the street grew quiet again. The adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a cold, hard anger. This was a new level. Stacking fines is one thing. Blocking a sidewalk is another. But coming onto my property in the middle of the night, armed with tools and deliberately destroying my security system, that was a declaration of war. She was trying to make me feel unsafe in my own home, the place my grandpa had built, the place I had adapted to be my sanctuary. She was crossing a line that should never be crossed, and she did it thinking she was invisible, that she could get away with it. I sat in my living room, the whole house dark except for the glow of my computer screen. Daisy lay at my feet, her head on her paws, watching me. I pulled up the video file from Tom's drone, which he had already sent me. The thermal camera was amazing. It showed a single heat signature moving quickly away from my property line just moments before the police arrived. The figure was unidentifiable, but the footage showed the path they took, across a neighbor's lawn and back towards the far end of the street, towards Karen's house. It wasn't proof, not in a legal sense, but for my purposes, it was confirmation. I saved the file. I wrote down every detail of the night's events, cross-referencing my timeline with Officer Ruiz's arrival and the timestamp on Tom's drone footage. I was building a fortress of facts. Each piece of evidence was another stone in the wall. Karen George thought she was laying a siege, but she was actually handing me the materials to build my defense and my counterattack. So, what now? I had a police report and a crime. Time to change strategy. The cut wire was the final piece of data I needed. It proved intent. It proved malice. This was no longer a simple dispute over bylaws. It was a campaign of targeted harassment. My grandpa's words echoed in my head. Be smarter. Smashing back wasn't the answer. I needed a different kind of weapon, not a hammer, but a key that could unlock the entire structure of the HOA and bring it down from the inside. I spent the next 2 days in my office, fueled by coffee and a cold sense of purpose. I ignored the new fine notice that appeared on my door for the noise violation of my alarm system going off. It was laughable. I just photographed it and added it to the folder. My focus was elsewhere. I was digging into the past, looking for a weakness in the foundation of Karen's little kingdom. I started with the house. My grandpa, a man who believed in keeping every piece of paper, had left behind a stack of file boxes in the attic. I spent an afternoon up there, dust in a cone of light. It was a treasure trove of history, old photos, and every paper tied to this land. I found the original deed from 1968. I found the property surveys. And then, at the bottom of a box labeled Community, I found it. A thick yellow document bound with a brass clasp. The title was simple, Land Lease Agreement. My heart started beating a little faster. I opened it. The agreement was dated 1985. The two parties were my grandfather, George Mercer, and the newly formed Sycamore Lane Homeowners Association. I read it, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. My engineer's mind started mapping the connections, seeing the structure. In the 80s, the neighborhood wanted a central place to hold meetings and community events. There was a small, unused utility building on a corner lot at the entrance to the subdivision. That lot, it turned out, was a piece of surplus land my grandpa had bought along with his own property decades earlier. He had leased it to the HOA for $1 a year. He was a generous man. He believed in community. He had given them a home base, a place to gather, and the lease had been renewed, decade after decade, without anyone ever really thinking about it. The HOA had been using that building as their official headquarters, their community center, for over 30 years. They had forgotten, or perhaps never even knew, who the actual owner of the land was. I kept reading, my excitement growing with every paragraph. The lease contained several standard but critically important clauses. The tenant, the HOA, was required to maintain the property in good order and keep the peace within the community. Even better, they were required to abide by all local, state, and federal laws in the execution of their duties. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal law. Harassing a resident with a disability and blocking their access was a direct violation of that law. The criminal destruction of my property was a flagrant violation of the clause about keeping the peace. Karen George, in her arrogant pursuit of power, had broken the very terms of the agreement that gave her a place to wield that power. She was a tenant in my grandpa's building, and by extension, she was now a tenant in mine. I sat back in my chair, the dusty document in my hands. The whole situation had just been turned completely upside down. It was the most elegant, unexpected solution I could have imagined. I didn't just have a case against her. I owned the ground she stood on. All this time, I had been thinking like a resident, a defendant. I had been playing defense. Now, I was the landlord. I was the one with the power. I had the key. Daisy padded into the room and rested her head on my lap, as if she could sense the massive shift in the emotional atmosphere. I stroked her fur, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was perfect. A structural flaw hidden deep inside the foundation. Karen George had no idea it even existed. I picked up the phone and called my grandpa. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he let out a low chuckle. "I'll be darned," he said. "I'd forgotten all about that. I just set it up and let it run. Seemed like the neighborly thing to do." "Well, Grandpa," I said, looking at the lease agreement, "your neighborly gesture is about to become the biggest lever anyone has ever seen." He laughed again. "Give her hell, son. But be smart about it." The plan was already forming in my mind, a two-pronged attack, one legal, one contractual. It would be precise, it would be devastating, and it would be entirely by the book. My next call was to a lawyer. I needed someone sharp, someone who understood both disability law and property law, someone who wouldn't just fight, but would help me strategically dismantle Karen's entire operation. The war wasn't just about fines anymore. It was about taking back control. And I had just found the master key to the whole kingdom. Finding the right lawyer was critical. I didn't need a bulldog. I needed a surgeon. Someone who could make precise, effective cuts. After a couple of calls, I found him. His name was Mark. He was a veteran who now specialized in ADA and property law. When I explained the situation over the phone, from the fines to the cut wire to the deed for the HOA community center, there was a long pause. Then he said just 4 words. "Oh, this is beautiful." I knew I had my guy. I met him the next day. I laid out my folder on his conference table. The photos, the violation letters, the video of the sidewalk incident, Officer Ruiz's police report, and the star of the show, the land lease agreement. Mark was a man of few words and decisive action. He reviewed everything with a quiet intensity. He watched the video twice. He read the lease 3 times. Finally, he looked up at me, a grim smile on his face. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "what Karen George has done isn't just petty or mean. It's a textbook case of targeted housing discrimination. The fines for your ramp and van are direct violations of the Fair Housing Act and the ADA. Her blocking the sidewalk is another ADA violation. The pattern of harassment, culminating in the destruction of your security system, gives us grounds for a civil restraining order. And this," he said, tapping the lease agreement, "this is the hammer." He laid out the plan. It was exactly what I had been thinking, but sharper, more professional, a 2-pronged attack. First, we would go on the offensive with the federal government. Mark drafted a formal complaint to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, detailing every action Karen and the HOA had taken against me. He attached copies of all my evidence. It was a thick, undeniable package of her own illegal actions, sent directly to the federal agency responsible for enforcing the ADA. That was the official long-term pressure. It would start an investigation that Karen could not ignore. The second prong was more direct, more personal. It was the landlord-tenant action. Mark drafted a notice to cure, or quit. It was a formal legal document, addressed to the Sycamore Lane Homeowners Association. It clearly listed the violations of the lease agreement. It cited the failure to keep the peace by criminally destroying my property. It cited the failure to abide by federal law by violating the ADA. It gave them a simple choice. They had 30 days to cure the violations. This meant dropping all fines, issuing a formal written apology, and dismissing Karen George as president. If they failed to do so within 30 days, the lease would be terminated, and they would be required to vacate the property. My property. It was a declaration of war, written in perfect, impenetrable legalese. We sent the ADA complaint to the Department of Justice via certified mail. Then, we hired a professional process server to deliver the notice to cure or quit. I wanted it done officially. I wanted Karen to be handed the document in a way she couldn't ignore or pretend she never received. The server delivered it 2 days later during the HOA's monthly public meeting, held right there in the community center. My community center. Tom was there, of course, and he gave me a full report. He said the server walked right up to the podium, said, "Karen George, you've been served," handed her the papers, and walked out. The room, Tom said, went completely silent. Karen's face, according to Tom's gleeful description, went from confused to white with rage as she read the first page. The trap was set. The legal machinery was now in motion. I had taken her secret, petty war and dragged it out into the open, under the bright, unforgiving light of the law. I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I had done my research. I had gathered my data. I had built my case. Now, I just had to wait and let the system work. I knew Karen wouldn't comply. Her ego wouldn't allow it. She wasn't going to apologize, and she certainly wasn't going to resign. She would fight. She would see this as a challenge to her authority, not a legal notice, and that's exactly what I was counting on. Her arrogance was now my greatest asset. The 30-day clock was ticking. Every day she chose to do nothing was another nail in her own coffin. The question now was not if she would respond, but how badly she would misplay her hand when she finally did. 30 days came and went. The silence from the HOA was deafening. There was no apology. The fines were not rescinded. And Karen George naturally did not step down. She did the one thing I had predicted she would do: nothing. She treated our legal notice like it was another piece of junk mail. In her mind, she was an immovable object. She couldn't comprehend that a force with far more power, the law, was about to move her. On day 31, Mark filed a lawsuit. It was an unlawful detainer action, the formal legal term for an eviction. A court date was set for 3 weeks later. Karen was served again, this time with a court summons. The game was escalating to its final stages. The day of the court hearing was gray and overcast, which seemed appropriate. I met Mark at the courthouse. I was in a suit, something I rarely wore. Daisy was in her official service vest, looking serious and professional. She lay at my feet, a calming presence in the sterile, intimidating environment. Mark was all business. He had our case file organized into a neat, tabbed binder. Everything was in chronological order. Every piece of evidence was clean and undeniable. We saw Karen in the hallway. She was with a lawyer who looked young and, frankly, a little overwhelmed. She shot me a look of pure venom. She still didn't get it. She still thought this was a personal fight she could win through sheer force of will. We were called into the courtroom. It was smaller than I expected. The judge was an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She read the case file name and asked both sides to present their case. Karen's lawyer went first. He was weak. He argued that the HOA had the right to enforce its rules. He claimed my ramp was an eyesore. He called the fines standard procedure. He tried to paint me as a disgruntled resident trying to get out of paying my dues. He barely even mentioned the lease agreement, treating it as some old, irrelevant document. It was a pathetic defense. He argued paint. We brought the lease. Then it was Mark's turn. He stood up, calm and confident. He didn't argue about the ramp or the fines. He went straight for the foundation. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a case about aesthetics. This is a case about a landlord and a tenant. The plaintiff, Mr. Mercer, is the legal owner of the property located at 1 Sycamore Lane, which the defendant, the Sycamore Lane Homeowners Association, has occupied under a lease agreement for over 3 decades. He placed the deed and the lease on the judge's bench. The judge picked up the documents and began to read. Her expression didn't change, but her focus intensified. "Counsel," the judge said, eyes still on the lease. "Answer two things for me." She looked at Karen. "One, is that your signature on this renewal?" Karen's jaw worked. "Yes." "Two, is that sidewalk public as the city map shows?" Karen glanced at her lawyer. "I believed, yes or no?" "Yes." The judge nodded once. "Then stop talking about paint." She slid the lease back. "We're on contract and access today." Karen shifted. The room exhaled. Mark didn't smile. He tapped the tab marked WRIT. Mark then laid out the violations, one by one. The lease requires the tenant to keep the peace. Yet the HOA, under the direction of its president, Karen George, engaged in a campaign of harassment against my client, which culminated in the criminal destruction of his property as detailed in this police report. He presented Officer Ruiz's report. The lease requires the tenant to abide by all federal laws. The HOA has repeatedly violated the Americans with Disabilities Act by fining my client for his wheelchair ramp and by physically obstructing his access to a public sidewalk. He presented the photos and played the video from my chair-mounted camera. The footage of Karen smugly blocking my path filled the quiet courtroom. He concluded his argument. "Your Honor, we served the defendant with a legal notice to cure or quit, giving them 30 days to rectify these clear breaches of their lease. They chose to ignore it. The lease broke. The rules say the keys come back to the owner. We ask the court to grant a writ of possession, restoring the property to its rightful owner, Mr. Mercer." He sat down. The entire presentation had taken less than 10 minutes. It was clean. It was logical. It was irrefutable. The judge looked at Karen's lawyer. "Do you have any response to the terms of the lease or these documented violations?" The young lawyer stammered. He had no response. He had come prepared to argue about paint colors and lawn maintenance, not contract law and federal statutes. The judge sighed, a tiny sound of exasperation. She looked at Karen, then at me. "The evidence is clear," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "The lease is a binding legal document. The tenant has failed to abide by its terms. The landlord has followed the correct legal procedure to terminate the tenancy." She looked down at her papers and stamped the document with a heavy, final thud. The sound cracked the room. Karen flinched. My hands shook once on the rims, then went still. Daisy's ear flicked. Mark slid me a pen like it was a medal. I signed for the writ copy. 10 pages, 1 key. The court grants the writ of possession. The defendant will have 48 hours to vacate the premises. The sheriff's department will be instructed to enforce this order. It was over, just like that. We had won. Karen sat there, her mouth slightly open, in stunned disbelief. She had been so sure of her power, she never even bothered to check if the throne she sat on was actually hers. As we left the courtroom, I saw the rage in her eyes solidify into something else, something colder. She wasn't just angry now. She was humiliated, and a humiliated tyrant is the most dangerous kind of animal. We had the legal victory, the piece of paper that said we were right. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that Karen George was not going to make the next 48 hours easy. The fight for the building itself was about to begin. The judge approved coordinated service to avoid a separate disturbance. Unsurprisingly, Karen and the HOA made no move to vacate the community center. They were treating the judge's order with the same contempt they had shown our initial notice. They believed it was their building, and no piece of paper was going to tell them otherwise. But a writ of possession isn't just a piece of paper. It's an order backed by the full authority of the county sheriff. This was the final step, reclaiming the physical property. And I knew we had to do it in the most public way possible. We had to show the entire neighborhood that the queen had no clothes, and her castle was built on sand. The perfect opportunity was just a few days away, the annual Sycamore Lane Summer Festival. It was the biggest community event of the year, organized and run by Karen herself. It was her coronation, her chance to parade around as the benevolent ruler of the neighborhood. The entire festival was centered in and around the community center. There were food trucks, a bouncy castle for the kids, games, and music. It was the heart of the community, and it was Karen's stage. We decided to let the show begin. Mark coordinated with the sheriff's department. We would execute the writ in the middle of the festival. On the day of the festival, the sun was bright and the street was filled with people. Families were laughing, kids were running around with painted faces. Music was playing from speakers set up on the community center's porch. And in the middle of it all was Karen, holding a clipboard, directing volunteers, radiating self-importance. She was in her element. She thought she had won. She had ignored the court order, and life had gone on as normal. She thought we were powerless. She had no idea what was coming. At exactly 1 o'clock, the peak of the festival, I wheeled down the street with Mark walking beside me. Following us, at a respectful distance, were 2 sheriff's deputies. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions neutral. They weren't here to cause a scene, just to enforce a judge's order. A black sign over the green doors read, HOA Headquarters. The music seemed to falter. Blue lights rolled in on schedule. Writ service, the deputy said, tapping his folder. Conversations died down. Tom, on his handheld, whispered, "And in this corner, the undefeated lease." A kid snorted. Even the ice cream guy paused mid-scoop. The deputy raised a brow, almost smiled, then squared back to business. Everyone could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Karen saw us. Her smile froze, then twisted into a scowl. She marched over to intercept us, her path putting her directly in front of the deputies. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. Her hand shot up toward my head. The lead deputy slid between us. "Ma'am, don't." Her palm hung in the air, shaking. Her voice was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You are not welcome here, Hank. You're trespassing on HOA property." Before I could say a word, the lead deputy stepped forward. He was a big, calm man who looked like he had seen it all. "Ma'am," he said, his voice polite but firm, "we're not here for him. We're here for the property. I have a writ of possession issued by the Superior Court. This building and the land it sits on are to be returned to the possession of the legal owner, Mr. Hank Mercer. You and everyone else need to vacate the building immediately." He handed her the official, court-stamped document. Karen just stared at it. She looked from the paper to me, then back to the deputy. The crowd was silent now, watching. This was better than any festival attraction. "This is ridiculous," she finally sputtered. "This is our community center. We've been here for 30 years. The deputy didn't flinch. "Ma'am, you can take that up with the judge. My job today is to enforce this order. We're going to have to ask everyone to get their personal belongings and clear the building." The second deputy was already moving to the front door, a set of heavy-duty bolt cutters in his hand, ready to deal with any locks. A professional locksmith was waiting in a van down the street. The public humiliation was devastating. Karen's face was a storm of fury and disbelief. She started shouting, calling me a thief, a liar. She accused the deputies of being my personal thugs. But her power was gone. The neighbors weren't looking at me. They were looking at her. They saw a woman screaming at law enforcement officers. They heard the deputy clearly state that I was the legal owner. The foundation of her authority, which was built on the perception that she was in charge, crumbled in a matter of seconds. People started gathering their things, pulling their kids away from the bouncy castle, a confused and awkward silence falling over the whole event. The party was over. The deputies were professional and efficient. They cleared the building, allowing people to take their personal items, but making sure no HOA property was removed. Within 30 minutes, the building was empty. The second deputy stretched yellow caution tape across both doors and posted the writ copy beside it. The lead deputy then handed me a new set of keys. "It's all yours, Mr. Mercer," he said with a slight nod. I sat there in my chair, holding the keys to the building that had been the source of so much grief. The festival was in ruins. Karen was standing on the lawn, surrounded by a few of her loyal cronies, her face pale. She had been publicly and comprehensively defeated. I had taken back my property, but as I looked at the hatred in her eyes, I knew this wasn't over. People do rash things when they're embarrassed, and I had a feeling Karen's desperation was about to make her do something incredibly stupid. I was right. Karen's public humiliation at the festival pushed her over the edge from petty tyrant to reckless criminal. She lost control. A few days after the lockout, she started a new campaign. This time, it wasn't just about me. It was about turning the entire neighborhood against me. She drafted a petition. The clerk later told us the notary listed was out of state. The seal was fake. The document was a work of fiction. It claimed I was a public nuisance and a danger to the community. It was filled with lies about loud parties. I don't have parties. Unregistered vehicles, my van is fully registered, and threatening behavior. I had never spoken a harsh word to her. The petition's goal was to demand the HOA take emergency action to seize the community center back from me, citing some non-existent bylaw about community safety. It was a desperate, foolish move, but she didn't stop there. She started following me. Whenever I left my house to get the mail or just enjoy the afternoon with Daisy, her golf cart would appear. She would park across the street, just watching me. Sometimes she would tail me as I wheeled down the sidewalk, staying just far enough away to avoid a direct confrontation, but close enough to be a constant menacing presence. She was trying to intimidate me, to bait me into a reaction that she could then use as proof for her ridiculous petition. But I'm not an easy man to rattle. I have steady nerves. And I have cameras. My discreet wheelchair camera was always on now when I left the house, and Tom, my ever-vigilant neighbor, had one of his long-range surveillance cameras trained on the street. Between the two of us, we were documenting every second of her stalking. We had hours of footage of her golf cart following me, of her sitting and staring at my house for long stretches of time. It was creepy, and it was clear, documented harassment. But the petition was the real weak point in her plan. A document full of signatures is a document that can be verified, and that's where her desperation made her sloppy. Mark, my lawyer, took one look at the petition, which Karen had been proudly showing to her supporters. He immediately spotted the flaw. "The notary stamp," he said, pointing to the seal at the bottom of the page. "Let's check on that." He made a call to the county clerk's office. The notary public listed on the petition was a real person, but the clerk's records, which are a matter of public record, showed that this particular notary had been on an officially documented, out-of-state leave of absence for the entire month. Her notary logbook and seal had been securely locked in a county vault. The notary stamp on Karen's petition was a forgery, a felony. It got better. The clerk's office, now interested in a case of potential fraud, started looking at the petition itself. They cross-referenced the names and signatures with the official voter registration database. Out of the 50 signatures on the petition, the clerk flagged nearly half of them as highly suspect. The handwriting didn't match the official signatures on file. Mark decided to make a few phone calls. He called 3 people whose names were on the list, people who lived on the other side of the neighborhood and had no history of being involved in HOA drama. The first person, a woman named Mrs. Gable, was horrified. "I never signed any petition," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Karen George came to my door and asked me to sign a get-well card for a sick neighbor. That's all I signed." The second person told a similar story. Karen had told him it was a petition to get the city to install a new streetlight. The third person, a younger man, said he had refused to sign anything, but his name was on the list anyway. It was a complete fraud. Karen hadn't just forged a notary seal, she had forged the signatures of her own neighbors and tricked others into signing under false pretenses. Mark gathered sworn affidavits from the people he spoke to. He got a certified statement from the county clerk's office regarding the forged notary stamp and the questionable signatures. He compiled the hours of video footage of her stalking me. The case against her was no longer just about civil matters like lease violations. It was a criminal case. Forgery, fraud, harassment, stalking. We had her. Cold. I felt a grim satisfaction. I hadn't wanted this to escalate to a criminal level, but she had made her choices. She had let her hatred and ego drive her to break serious laws. We now had a choice to make. We could take this information directly to the district attorney and have her prosecuted, or we could use it as the ultimate leverage to end this conflict once and for all. I thought about what my grandpa had said, be smarter. Sending Karen to jail might feel good for a moment, but it wouldn't solve the root problem. The root problem was the HOA itself, the broken system that had given a person like her so much unchecked power in the first place. The petition, her greatest act of foolishness, had just given us the weapon we needed to tear the whole rotten structure down. The courtroom and the lockout were the fight. The meeting would make it official. The time for defense was over. It was time to end the HOA. The fraud and forgery were the final straws. It wasn't just an attack on me anymore. It was an attack on the integrity of the entire community. Karen had lied to and used her own neighbors. That was a betrayal that people wouldn't forgive. Mark, Tom, and I looked through the HOA's own governing documents, the thick binder of rules Karen loved to quote, and buried deep in the bylaws, we found the clause we were looking for. It was a dissolution clause. The homeowners association could be immediately dissolved with a recall vote of the entire board, requiring a simple majority of all homeowners present, 50% plus one. It was a democratic kill switch, put in place by the original founders and likely forgotten by everyone. The plan was set. We used the bylaws to call for an emergency community meeting. We set the vote for the following week so tempers could cool and facts could speak. We sent out official notices to every single homeowner, stating the purpose of the meeting clearly. A vote to recall the current board of directors and dissolve the Sycamore Lane Homeowners Association. We booked a room at the local library, a neutral space. We wanted this to be official, public, and undeniable. For a week, Tom and I went door to door. We didn't sling mud, we just presented the facts. We showed our neighbors the sworn affidavits from the people whose signatures were forged. We showed them the statement from the county clerk about the fraudulent notary stamp. We explained the truth about the community center lease. We laid out the simple choice: continue to live under the thumb of a corrupt, fraudulent leadership, or vote to dissolve the whole thing and go back to being just neighbors, governed by city laws like normal people. The night of the meeting, the library conference room was packed. More people showed up than I had ever seen at an HOA meeting before. The mood was tense. You could feel the anger and the betrayal in the air. Karen was there with her 2 remaining board members, a pair of sycophants who looked terrified. She tried to take control of the meeting, to run it like one of her usual sham trials. But this time, no one was listening. A homeowner, a man I barely knew, stood up and nominated me to chair the meeting. The motion was seconded and passed with a loud "aye" before Karen could even object. Her power was gone. The room was no longer hers. I wheeled myself to the front of the room. I kept it simple. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid out the evidence piece by piece on a projector for everyone to see. The forged petition, the clerk's report, the affidavits, the video of her stalking me. I presented it not as a personal grievance, but as a series of crimes committed against the community itself. This is not about a wheelchair ramp, I said, my voice steady. This is not about the color you paint your door or where you park your car. This is about trust. It's about the fact that the person put in charge of our community chose to lie, to forge documents, and to harass a resident rather than admit she was wrong. The system that allowed this to happen is broken. Tonight, we have a chance to fix it. The bylaws give us that power. Then I opened the floor. For the first time, people felt safe to speak. One by one, my neighbors stood up and told their own stories of Karen's petty tyranny, fines for holiday decorations, threats over kids playing in the street, harassment over gardens that didn't meet her personal standards. The trickle of complaints became a flood. The anger in the room was palpable. Karen tried to fight back. She stood up and started screaming, calling everyone liars, calling me a monster who was trying to destroy the neighborhood. But her voice was drowned out. No one was buying her act anymore. They had seen the proof. They had heard the testimony of their friends and neighbors. Finally, I called the question. The motion on the floor is to recall the board and dissolve the Sycamore Lane Homeowners Association. All in favor, please raise your hand. For a moment, there was silence. Then a hand went up. Then another. And another. Soon, the room was a forest of hands. Tom and another neighbor did the count, carefully and publicly. They counted the homeowners present, calculated the required majority, and then counted the raised hands. Tom walked to the front of the room, a huge grin on his face. "The motion passes," he announced, his voice booming in the quiet room. Overwhelmingly. A wave of applause and relief washed over the room. It was done. The HOA was gone. Karen stood there, frozen, her face a mask of utter defeat. She had lost everything, her power, her position, her reputation. She turned and stormed out of the room without another word, her 2 board members scurrying after her. The fight was over. We had used her own rulebook to dismantle her entire kingdom. We had won. As the room cleared out, neighbors came up to me, shaking my hand, thanking me. We were just neighbors again. On my way home, I rolled past HQ. The tape still crossed the doors. The deputy nodded once. It felt like the picture on a thumbnail. Only real. And as I wheeled out into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. It was the first breath of truly free air I had taken in months. But the question remained, what comes next after the tyrant is gone? What does a neighborhood do the day after the revolution? The aftermath was quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. The day after the vote, a profound sense of peace settled over the neighborhood. There were no more golf cart patrols, no more warning letters tucked under windshield wipers. The ugly brown HOA signs at the entrance to the subdivision were gone by the end of the week, taken down by a cheerful group of neighbors with a pickup truck. It was as if the whole street could finally exhale. The air was lighter. People smiled more. Kids left their bikes on their lawns, and no one cared. It felt like a real neighborhood again. Our first project as a newly liberated community was fixing the sidewalks. Without the HOA's bureaucracy, a few of us formed a simple committee. We got direct quotes from contractors and used the leftover HOA funds, which were turned over to a community trust managed by the library to repair the cracked and uneven pavement. We added proper ADA-compliant curb cuts at every intersection. It was done in a month, something the HOA had been studying for years. My ramp stayed right where it was, no longer a symbol of defiance, but just a normal part of my house. A way for me to get home. No one gave it a second glance. The community center, my community center, became the hub of the neighborhood in a way it never was under Karen's rule. We turned it into a true public space. We set up a tool lending library in the back room, filled with everything from lawnmowers to power saws that people could borrow. The main room became a place for kids' playgroups, yoga classes, and potluck dinners. We posted one page, "Be respectful, clean up, welcome neighbors." That was it. No fines, no violations, no board of directors, just a shared understanding. As for Karen George, the consequences of her actions finally caught up with her. The district attorney, prompted by the clerk's report and Mark's evidence, filed forgery and fraud charges. Facing it all, she took a plea, probation, a heavy fine, and apology letters to everyone she'd forged. Mine was terse and bitter, but it was guilt on paper. A few months later, a for sale sign went up. She couldn't stand being just another neighbor. She moved. Some afternoons I roll with Daisy. Neighbors wave. We talk weather and ball scores. Tom is in his garage, antenna parts everywhere. He gives me a thumbs up. Officer Ruiz slows and nods. He says rookies study our case to learn how to document harassment right. It's a good, quiet life. Grandpa visited last week. We watched the sunset. "You did good, Hank," he said. "You didn't just fight for yourself." I think about that. My own started as a house and a ramp. It grew to mean neighbors, community, simple fairness. I didn't plan a revolution. I'm an engineer. I saw a bad system and took it apart, piece by piece, and helped build something better. I roll past the community center, now busy with kids and potlucks. My ramp stays, paths are clear, our street is calm. I hold the keys, but it's ours. Elegant enough.